The morning light spilled through the large glass windows of the small diner at the corner of the street. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of sizzling bacon and the clatter of plates. Inside, waitresses moved quickly between tables, refilling mugs and delivering breakfast orders. Among them was a young woman named Lila. She wore the same pale blue uniform every morning, her hair tied neatly back, her movements quiet and efficient. To the people who didn't look closely, she was just another worker at the diner. But for those who noticed, there was something different about her. A faint but long scar ran down the side of her face, starting near her eye and ending near her jawline. It was old, healed, but still visible. Most days she tried to ignore it, hoping others would too. But that was never the case. She could feel their eyes on her whenever she passed by. Some looked curious, some uncomfortable, and others openly judgmental. She had grown used to the whispers, the small laughs, the way some people would lower their voices when she came near. She didn't like attention, not anymore. That morning, as she poured coffee for a table of regulars, one of the men leaned toward another and said in a low voice, not low enough. I'd lose my appetite if I had to look at that while eating. Lila heard it. She always heard. Her heart sank a little, but she kept her face calm. She smiled gently, placed the check on their table and said, "Let me know if you need anything else." She walked away, her hands trembling slightly. It had been years since the accident, yet moments like that still stung like fresh wounds. She didn't cry anymore. She just took a deep breath and kept working. Behind the counter, her co-worker Maya whispered softly, "You okay?" Lila nodded without meeting her eyes. "I'm fine. Just tired." She wasn't fine, but she had learned that people didn't really want the truth. When her shift ended at 2 in the afternoon, she sat alone in the back booth, eating a small plate of fries. The diner was almost empty now, the lunch rush over. She glanced at her reflection in the window, tracing the outline of the scar with her eyes. There were days she didn't even notice it anymore. But then someone would remind her. She had been a child when it happened. A fire in her family's apartment that left her with the mark she would carry forever. The scar didn't just change her face. It changed how the world saw her. Kids at school had laughed at her. Adults tried to act polite, but she saw the pity in their eyes. Eventually, she learned to hide behind kindness, behind quietness, behind work. Now at 26, she worked double shifts most days just to keep her small rented room and pay her bills. Her life was simple. Wake up early, go to work, serve others, come home, and repeat. There wasn't much room for dreams anymore, but she still had one. A secret, fragile dream. She had always loved baking. When she was a teenager, her mother used to say her pies could make anyone smile. Before her mother passed away, she told Lila she should open a bakery someday. "Your hands have warmth," her mother said once. "People can taste that in your food." That dream now lived like a quiet ember in her heart. She told no one, not even Maya. What would be the point? People would just laugh. One evening, the diner was busier than usual. A group of office workers had come in, loud and careless after what looked like a long day. Lila was serving their table, smiling politely as she took their orders. But one man dressed in an expensive suit looked at her too long, smirking. When she walked away, he muttered to his friends, "They'll let anyone serve food these days, huh?" The group laughed. Lila stopped for half a second but kept walking. She placed their order in the kitchen, pretending she hadn't heard. Her stomach tightened, her throat dry. Maya saw her face and asked quietly, "Was it them again?" Lila just nodded. "It's fine. They're just customers," but she wasn't fine. That night, as she walked home under the flickering streetlights, she thought about how cruel people could be for no reason. She wondered if her life would always be this way, working hard, being polite, and still being laughed at. She didn't want to be invisible, but she didn't want pity either. Her tiny apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She pressed her fingers to her scar, remembering her mother's voice telling her she was beautiful no matter what. But the world didn't think so. She sighed and whispered to herself, "It's just skin. It shouldn't matter." The next morning she returned to work. The same coffee smell, the same customers, the same jokes from the kitchen staff. Life repeated itself in a loop. She didn't expect anything different anymore. But that day a man she had never seen before walked in. He wasn't loud or arrogant like most of the men who came in wearing suits. He looked calm, thoughtful, and somewhat reserved. He chose a seat near the window and opened a small notebook. Lila walked over to his table with a menu and a gentle smile. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" He looked up at her, and for the first time in a long time, someone didn't flinch when they saw her face. His eyes didn't linger on her scar. They looked straight into hers. He smiled kindly and said, "Coffee black." "And whatever breakfast you recommend." She nodded, a little surprised. "All right. I'll bring that right up." When she returned with the food, he thanked her warmly, looking genuinely grateful. There was something about the way he said thank you. It wasn't casual. It felt sincere. She smiled back, almost forgetting for a moment that she was used to hiding. The man stayed for a while, quietly writing in his notebook. Before he left, he placed a generous tip on the table. When Lila came to clear his plate, she saw the tip and frowned slightly. Maybe he had made a mistake. She looked toward the door, but he was already gone. Later that evening, Maya nudged her. "Did you see the guy who was sitting by the window?" "He was kind of handsome." Lila smiled faintly. "Yeah, he was polite too. Polite and rich, maybe," Maya teased. "You never know," Lila shook her head. "He was just being nice. Don't make it something it's not." But when she went home that night, she couldn't help thinking about how differently he had looked at her. No pity, no judgment. Just normal. Days passed and the man came back again. He sat in the same spot by the window, always with his notebook, always ordering coffee and whatever she recommended. He never asked personal questions. Sometimes they talked about the weather, or how busy the diner was. She learned his name was Ethan, but that was all he said about himself. Lila began to notice that he paid attention, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that felt human. He noticed when she looked tired. He thanked her when she remembered his order. He even complimented the pie once, saying it tasted like home. That small sentence stayed with her all day. One afternoon, as she wiped the counter, she overheard two customers whispering again. One of them said, "It's sad when people like that think they can still work in customer service. It's distracting." She froze for a moment, her rag still in hand. Then she looked over at Ethan, who had just walked in. He must have heard them too, because his expression changed. He watched her quietly as she smiled at the rude customers and continued her work like nothing had happened. That night, after her shift, she walked home with her shoulders a little heavier. She had thought she was used to it, but sometimes the words dug deeper. She wanted to scream, but she stayed quiet. People didn't understand what their words did. They thought scars were ugly because they didn't have to live with them. In her small apartment, she sat at the table, writing in her old notebook. She wrote things she couldn't say out loud, her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. Tonight she wrote about how tired she was of pretending, how tired she was of people only seeing her face and not her heart. But then she also wrote about Ethan, the quiet man who smiled at her without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not for what was missing, but for what was still there. The next morning she arrived early to open the diner. The street outside was still half asleep, the sky pale with dawn. She brewed the first pot of coffee and watched the steam rise. She liked this quiet hour before the world woke up. It made her feel calm. By 8 o'clock, the regulars had started coming in. Lila moved gracefully through her routine, greeting each customer with her soft voice. When Ethan arrived, he smiled at her as usual. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied. "The usual," he nodded. "Please." When she brought his order, she noticed a small flower on the table. He must have picked it from somewhere on his way in. It was nothing fancy, just a small white daisy. "For you," he said simply, pushing it toward her. She blinked, unsure how to react. "Oh, thank you. That's really kind." "It's just a flower," he said with a soft smile. "But I thought your day could use something nice." She looked at him for a moment, speechless. No one had given her anything just to be kind in a very long time. For the rest of the day, she kept that flower in a small cup of water by the register. Every time she looked at it, something inside her felt lighter. That evening, as she walked home, she realized that sometimes kindness from one stranger could feel like the first drop of rain after a long, dry season. She didn't know who Ethan really was, or why he kept coming back, but she felt grateful. She didn't know that this quiet man would soon change her life in ways she could never imagine. The weeks passed, and Lila began to notice that Ethan had become a quiet part of her daily routine. Every few days he would come to the diner, sit, by the same window, and order the same black coffee and breakfast special. It had become something she looked forward to, though she would never admit it aloud. There was something peaceful about his presence. He wasn't like the usual customers who came in loud, demanding, and impatient. He was calm. When he spoke, his voice had a kind of warmth that made her feel safe. Sometimes he asked simple things about her day. If she had slept well, how the morning rush had been, or whether she'd had time to eat something. Those small questions meant more than he could ever know. Most people never asked her anything about herself. They came, they ordered, they left. But Ethan seemed to notice the details others missed. The tired look in her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands after a stressful rush. The way she always straightened her uniform before serving a new customer. One quiet afternoon when the diner was half empty, Ethan asked her, "Do you ever take a day off?" Lila smiled a little. "Not really. Days off mean no tips, and tips mean rent." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair, but you should rest sometimes. You look like you haven't stopped moving in weeks." She laughed softly. "Maybe you're right, but I've been doing this for years. I'm used to it now." There was a small pause. He looked at her face for a moment. Not at the scar, but at her expression. "You must be stronger than most people," he said quietly. She looked down, embarrassed but touched. "I don't know about that. I just don't have much of a choice." Ethan smiled gently. Sometimes strength looks like having no choice and still showing up anyway. His words stayed with her long after he left that day. Later that evening, when she sat on her narrow bed in her small apartment, she thought about how strange it was that a simple customer could make her think differently about herself. She had always seen her life as something she had to survive, but when he spoke to her, she started to see that maybe there was something to be proud of in her survival. The next morning, the diner was unusually crowded. A tour bus had stopped nearby, and the place was packed with travelers. The noise, the laughter, the clinking of plates. It was chaos. Lila moved quickly, her steps practiced and precise. She smiled at everyone, even when her feet ached and her back hurt. In the middle of the rush, she caught a glimpse of Ethan entering. He looked around for a seat, but found none. She waved him over toward the counter. "You can sit here if you don't mind," she said with a smile. He sat at the counter, watching her move around with ease. "You look like you're running this place," he joked. Lila laughed softly, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I practically do sometimes. The manager hides in the office whenever we get this busy." Ethan chuckled. "Then they should be paying you double." She smiled faintly. "I wish." After a while, the crowd thinned. When the last of the travelers left, Lila finally sat down for a moment, breathing heavily. Ethan was still there, sipping the last of his coffee. He looked at her, concerned. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just another day." "You say that a lot," he said. "What?" "Just another day." "You always say it like you're trying to convince yourself it's true." She thought about that for a second, surprised. "Maybe I am," she admitted. They both laughed quietly, but there was something real in what he said. That night, as she cleaned the tables after closing, Maya teased her. "You and that guy, what's his deal? He's here more than the owner." Lila smiled. "He's just nice. He doesn't treat me like—" She paused, not finishing the sentence. Maya nodded, understanding. "Yeah, I get it. Not many people see past things." When she walked home later, the air was cool and the streets were quiet. Her reflection followed her in the dark shop windows. For the first time in a long time, she looked at herself and didn't flinch. Maybe she really was strong. Maybe the scar didn't make her broken. It just made her human. The next few weeks followed the same rhythm. Ethan kept coming. Sometimes he brought a newspaper and shared little stories he found interesting. Other times he simply sat quietly and asked her about her favorite desserts or what she liked to cook at home. One morning he asked her a question she didn't expect. "If you could do anything in the world, what would you do?" Lila blinked, caught off guard. "Anything?" He nodded. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should tell him. But his eyes were kind, patient. She took a deep breath. I used to dream about opening a bakery, just a small one. I love baking. It's the only time I feel peaceful. But that was a long time ago. Life happened. Why did you stop dreaming about it? He asked gently. She looked down at her hands. Money, mostly. And, I guess, fear. People judge too easily. I don't know if anyone would even come. He studied her quietly. People will come if your heart is in it. Good food doesn't lie. She smiled, but her eyes looked far away. Maybe. But dreams like that aren't meant for people like me. He didn't argue. He just said softly, I don't believe that. The next day, Lila woke up earlier than usual. She decided to bake something before work. It had been years since she'd done it seriously. She mixed flour, sugar, and butter in her small kitchen, the smell of vanilla filling the air. When the small batch of pies came out of the oven, golden and perfect, she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She wrapped one in a napkin and took it with her to work. When Ethan came in, she placed it in front of him. Try this, she said shyly. He looked surprised. You made this? She nodded. I used to bake a lot. I wanted to see if I still could. He took a bite and smiled instantly. This is incredible. You should be selling these. Her cheeks turned slightly red. It's just a hobby. It's more than that, he said seriously. You have real talent. His words touched something deep inside her. She didn't say it, but she carried them with her all day. Later that week, the same group of businessmen from before came into the diner again. Lila immediately felt a pit in her stomach. They always made her uncomfortable. As she approached their table, one of them smirked. Oh, it's you again. I was hoping for someone easier to look at. The others laughed. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the menus down. She forced a polite smile. Can I get you anything to drink? Before she could walk away, Ethan, who had just entered the diner, overheard the comment. He stopped in his tracks and looked directly at the man. The room grew tense. That's enough, Ethan said calmly but firmly. The man turned to him, annoyed. Excuse me? You heard me, Ethan said. You don't talk to people like that, especially not to someone who's working hard to serve you. The diner went quiet. Everyone stopped what they were doing. The businessman scoffed, muttering something under his breath, but he didn't say anything else. The group sat awkwardly, and Lila quickly stepped away, her face flushed. When she looked back at Ethan, he was still standing there, calm as ever. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever stood up for her like that. After the men left, she walked over to his table. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. He looked at her. I did. Because it was wrong. People like that think they can say anything and walk away. They can't. She swallowed hard, emotions rising in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled gently. You don't owe me thanks. You deserve respect. Those words broke something open in her heart. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what he said. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind. For the first time in years, she felt like someone had actually seen her, not as a scarred face, not as a waitress, but as a person who deserved kindness. The next morning, Maya noticed how quiet Lila was. You're thinking about him, aren't you? She teased. Lila smiled softly. Not like that, it's just, no one's ever done that for me. Maya nodded. Sometimes people come into your life for a reason. Maybe he's one of those people. That day, Lila worked with a lighter heart. She even caught herself humming as she wiped tables. When Ethan came in, she greeted him with a genuine smile. Coffee, right? He nodded. And maybe one of those pies if you made any. She laughed. I might have something. They talked for a while, about small things, about life. He told her that he believed in doing things that made people happy, not just things that made money. She didn't know what he did for a living, but there was something thoughtful and grounded about him. As the sun began to set, the light streamed through the diner windows, painting the tables in warm colors. Lila looked around and realized that, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was just existing. She felt present. She still had her scar. She still worked long hours. Her life hadn't changed on the outside, but something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was because of the man who looked at her without judgment. Or maybe it was because she had finally started to believe that kindness still existed in the world. That night, as she closed the diner, she looked at the reflection in the window again. She touched the side of her face gently. The scar was still there, but it didn't hurt to see it anymore. For the first time, she smiled at her reflection, and somewhere deep inside, that old ember of a dream, the one about baking, about owning, something of her own, started to glow again quietly but steadily. She didn't know what would come next, but for once she wasn't afraid to find out. The following week felt different for Lila. The diner still looked the same, with the same old tables, the same coffee smell, and the same chipped tiles behind the counter, but inside her something had quietly changed. The sting of other people's looks didn't cut as deep as before. Somehow the cruel words that used to echo in her mind had started to fade, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a soft feeling that things might not always be this hard. That maybe life still had a way of surprising her. Every morning she found herself glancing at the door, wondering when Ethan would walk in. Sometimes he came early, sometimes later, but he always came. His presence had become a small light in her daily routine, something she could look forward to between the endless noise of the diner. One morning, when she brought him his usual coffee, he looked up from his notebook and said, "You look happier this week." She smiled shyly. "Maybe I am. Things feel lighter somehow." "I can tell," he said. "It suits you." She looked down, her cheeks warming a little. Compliments still made her nervous, especially from someone who actually meant them. When the breakfast rush slowed down, Ethan closed his notebook and asked softly, "Do you still bake when you have time?" "Sometimes," she said. "Mostly small things like pies or cookies. I don't have a real kitchen, just a tiny stove that barely works." "I'd like to try more of what you bake," he said with a small smile. "You have a gift. I could tell from that pie." She laughed softly. "You're just being kind." "I'm being honest," he said gently. "You should believe people when they see something good in you." His words made her pause. She didn't know how to respond. For so many years, she had only heard the opposite. People pointing out her flaws, her face, her imperfections. Hearing someone talk about her gifts felt almost foreign. That evening, after her shift, she walked home through the quiet streets, her shoes clicking softly against the pavement. She thought about his words. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from her own dreams. Maybe she could at least try again. When she reached her small apartment, she took out her mother's old recipe book from the drawer. The cover was worn, and some of the pages had stains from years of use. She flipped through it slowly, running her fingers over the handwritten notes in the margins. Her mother had always written small tips next to every recipe, reminders of patience, of love, of care. Lila smiled faintly. She remembered the nights when they used to bake together, laughing at their mistakes, eating too much sugar, and staying up late waiting for the oven timer to ding. Those were happy memories. She spent the night baking a small batch of pastries. The smell filled her apartment, warm and sweet. When she took the tray out of the oven, she couldn't help but smile. She tasted one, and for the first time in years, she felt proud. Not just because it tasted good, but because it reminded her of who she was before life had worn her down. The next morning, she packed a few in a small box and brought them to the diner. When Ethan came in, she placed the box in front of him. "Try these," she said shyly. "I made them last night." He opened the box, smiled, and took a bite. "These are incredible," he said. "You really could sell these." She laughed softly. "That's what you said about the pie." "Because it's true," he replied. "You have something special. You just don't see it yet." Lila didn't know what to say. There was something about the way he spoke that made her feel seen. It wasn't just kindness. It was belief. But the world didn't always match that kindness. Later that afternoon, a group of customers came in, the kind that made her uneasy. They were loud, careless, and full of casual cruelty. Lila did her best to serve them politely, but one of them leaned back in his seat and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Man, I don't know how people eat here with that face walking around." The laughter that followed burned in her ears. She froze for a second, her hands shaking, and then turned away. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her reaction, but Ethan, who had been sitting nearby, had heard everything. He slowly stood up, his calm expression replaced with quiet anger. He walked over to their table, his voice steady but firm. "That's enough," he said. The men looked at him, surprised. "What's your problem?" one of them asked. "My problem," Ethan said evenly, "is people who think it's acceptable to humiliate someone who's doing her job with more grace than you'll ever have." The diner went silent. Even the sound of the kitchen stopped. One of the men scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "Hey, relax, it's just a joke." "No," Ethan said, "it's not. You don't get to call cruelty a joke." The man didn't reply. The group mumbled awkwardly, then got up and left, leaving a tip on the table that Lila didn't touch. She stood by the counter, stunned. No one had ever defended her like that before. When Ethan came back to his seat, she walked over, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said softly. "You deserve respect, just like anyone else." Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. He smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me. You just need to remember that what they said doesn't define you." That night, when she got home, she couldn't stop thinking about what happened. It had been such a small moment, but it felt like something inside her had been repaired. Someone had finally stood beside her when the world turned cruel. The next few days, she felt stronger. She walked with her head a little higher. She smiled more easily, even when customers were rude. And every time Ethan came in, she felt a quiet sense of peace. One afternoon, when the diner was slow, Ethan sat at his usual table writing in his notebook. Lila brought him his coffee and leaned slightly against the counter. "You always write in that notebook," she said. "What are you working on?" He looked up, smiling. "Mostly ideas. Thoughts about business, people, things I want to build." She laughed lightly. "You sound like one of those big company owners." He tilted his head. "Would that be a bad thing?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I just don't think of people like that coming here. This place isn't fancy." "I like places like this," he said. "Real people come here. The kind who work hard, who don't pretend to be something they're not." She smiled. "You talk like someone who's seen both sides." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe I have." She didn't press further. He didn't seem like someone who bragged. He carried himself with quiet confidence, not the loud kind that filled the diner with noise. That evening, when Ethan left, Lila found a small note under his empty cup. It said, "Don't stop baking. You're meant for more than this diner." She stared at the note for a long time. Her heart felt full. Later that week, she brought more baked goods, cinnamon rolls this time, and shared them with Maya and a few of the regulars. Everyone loved them. Even the manager, who rarely paid attention to anything, complimented her. For the first time, Lila felt like she was good at something again. But not everyone was kind. One of her co-workers, a woman who had never liked her much, muttered under her breath, "Guess you need a man to tell you you're talented before you believe it." Lila paused but didn't respond. She knew better than to argue. Still, her chest hurt. It wasn't about a man's approval. It was about someone believing in her when she couldn't believe in herself. That night, Ethan didn't come to the diner. For some reason, she felt his absence more than she expected. She kept glancing at the door, waiting, but he never showed up. The next day, she waited again. Still no sign of him. Days turned into a week, and he didn't return. Lila tried to tell herself. It didn't matter that he was just a customer. But her heart felt heavier than it should have. She had gotten used to his presence, his calm voice, his quiet support, his kindness. Without it, the diner felt emptier. One night, as she cleaned up after closing, she found herself whispering to the empty tables, "I hope you're okay." She didn't know why she said it out loud. Maybe because she needed to hear her own voice say she missed him. A few more days passed before anything changed. On a rainy evening, when the diner was almost empty, the door opened, and there he was, soaked but smiling. "You're late," she said softly, unable to hide the relief in her voice. "Got caught up in a project," he said, sitting down. "I've missed your coffee." She smiled. "I've missed serving it." They talked a little, and she noticed he looked tired, but there was still that calmness in his eyes. He asked how she'd been, and she told him about the pastries, about how people had started asking for them. He listened carefully, genuinely happy for her. When he finished his meal, he said quietly, "I think you should start thinking about that bakery again." She laughed, shaking her head. "It's just a dream." "Dreams are just plans waiting for courage," he said. "And you have plenty of that." Her heart fluttered. She didn't know how to respond. When he left that night, the sound of rain followed him out the door. Lila watched from the window as he disappeared into the streetlights, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She looked at her own face. The scar that once made her feel invisible now didn't seem so big anymore. Maybe because, for the first time in years, someone had looked past it. Someone had seen her heart, her effort, her quiet strength, and deep down, she knew something important was beginning to change, not just around her, but inside her. For the first time in her life, she was starting to believe that she was more than her past, more than the scar, more than the whispers, and she had no idea that the man who sat by the window with his notebook was about to change her world completely. The next morning started quietly. The sky was pale and the air was cold, and Lila walked to the diner with her hands tucked deep into her coat pockets. The streets were still damp from last night's rain, and puddles reflected bits of gray clouds and soft light. She felt strangely hopeful, even though she didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was because Ethan had come back. Maybe it was because she was starting to see life in a new way. Softer, brighter, not so heavy anymore. When she reached the diner, she tied her apron and started her shift like always. But something had changed in how she moved. Her smile was easier, her laugh was lighter, and even her coworkers noticed it. "Someone looks happy today," Maya teased as she filled the coffee pots. "Maybe I am," Lila said, smiling. "It feels good to just breathe, you know?" Maya grinned. "If it's that mysterious guy who writes in his notebook, I say keep breathing." Lila laughed. "It's not like that. He's just kind. He listens." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Maya said softly. That day, Ethan came in later than usual. He looked different, a little more serious, like something was on his mind. He greeted her with his usual warm smile, but there was a weight behind his eyes. "You okay?" she asked quietly as she poured his coffee. "Just a lot going on," he said. "I've been working on something important." She sat across from him for a moment, curious. "Something for work?" He nodded. "Yes, it's complicated, but it's something I care about." Lila smiled gently. "Well, I hope it works out. You deserve good things." He looked at her for a moment as if he wanted to say something but held it back. Then he simply said, "You do too." The next few days went by like that. Quiet moments, small talks, little smiles that said more than words could. Lila continued baking at night, trying new recipes and sometimes bringing them to the diner to share. Customers started asking for her pastries, and soon, the manager told her they could add them to the menu for a trial run. When she told Ethan, his face lit up. "See? I told you people would love your work." "It's just a small thing," she said modestly. "That's how big things start," he replied. It was true. Little by little, people began coming to the diner not just for coffee, but for her baked goods. Some even asked to meet the girl who made the pies. Lila was nervous at first, but when she saw people smiling as they ate what she had created, she felt a kind of happiness she hadn't felt in years. But good things often come with tests. One afternoon, as Lila was serving a group of regulars, a new customer walked in, a sharply dressed woman with an air of quiet authority. She sat down near the window, ordered coffee, and watched Lila closely as she worked. There was something observant about her gaze, something that made Lila wonder if she had done something wrong. When the woman finished her coffee, she motioned for Lila to come over. "You made the pastries, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes," Lila said cautiously. "Is everything all right?" The woman smiled faintly. "They're excellent. Better than some bakeries I visited. Have you ever thought about selling them yourself?" Lila shook her head, laughing nervously. "Oh no, I just bake for the diner. It's nothing big." The woman's smile widened slightly. "Don't underestimate yourself. Talent like this deserves a bigger place." Before Lila could say anything, Ethan walked in. When he saw the woman, surprise flashed across his face. "Amelia," he said, walking over. "Didn't expect to see you here." Lila looked between them, confused. The woman turned toward him with a polite nod. "I could say the same, Ethan. You have interesting taste in places." "I like real places," he said. "And real people." Amelia's gaze drifted back to Lila. "She's the baker?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "She's the reason this diner smells so good every morning." Amelia smiled again. "Impressive. You've got an eye for talent." Lila stood there awkwardly, unsure what to say. The conversation felt heavier than it should have. After Amelia left, Lila finally asked, "Who was that?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "She's an investor. We've worked together before." "So you are a businessman," Lila said softly. He smiled faintly. Something like that. That night she couldn't stop thinking about it. For the first time, she realized she knew very little about him. He had always been kind, calm, and easy to talk to, but he never really talked about himself. A few days later, Ethan didn't come in. Then another day passed, and another. Lila started to worry again, the same ache from before returning to her chest. One night after closing, she was walking home when she saw a familiar car parked by the corner. The door opened and Ethan stepped out. "Ethan?" she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I was waiting for you," he said softly. "I didn't want to bother you at work." She frowned slightly. "You could never bother me. I was just worried you weren't okay." He looked down, then met her eyes again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About dreams, about starting over. I've been trying to figure out something." "What do you mean?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "I want to help you start your bakery." She blinked, unsure she heard right. "What? I mean it," he said. "You have talent, and it shouldn't be wasted. I can help you set up a small place, get the right permits, equipment, everything. You just have to say yes." Lila's mouth went dry. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to jump with joy, but another part held back. "I can't accept that. It's too much. You've already done so much for me." He shook his head. "This isn't charity. It's an investment, and in someone who deserves it." She hesitated. "Why me?" "Because I see something in you that most people overlook," he said quietly. "You don't give up, even when life tries to break you. People like you are rare." Her throat tightened. "You barely know me," he smiled gently. "I know enough." There was a long pause. The sound of cars in the distance filled the silence. Finally, she said, "I'll think about it." He nodded. "That's all I ask." The following days were a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Part of her was thrilled at the idea of finally having her own bakery. Another part was scared. Scared of failing, of disappointing him, of leaving behind the only place she had known for years. Maya was the first to notice her distraction. "You've been quiet lately." "Everything okay?" Lila sighed. "He offered to help me start a bakery." Maya's eyes widened. "What? That's huge." "What did you say?" "I told him I'd think about it," Lila said. "It just feels too big." Maya smiled gently. "You've worked your whole life for a chance like this. Maybe it's finally your time." Lila smiled faintly but didn't answer. That weekend, Ethan invited her to see a small empty shop on the edge of town. It was old but charming. Big windows, brick walls, and the faint smell of flour from when it used to be a bakery years ago. She walked around slowly, touching the counter, the window frames, imagining what it could look like filled with warmth and light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It could be yours," Ethan said softly. She turned to him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I believe in people who try," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to start from nothing." She looked at him closely. "You've been through hard times too, haven't you?" He smiled faintly. "Everyone has their scars, Lila. Some just don't show on the outside. Something in his tone made her heart ache. She wanted to ask more, but she could tell he wasn't ready to talk about it. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the shop, talking about what it could become. By the end of it, she was smiling again, really smiling. For the first time, she could see a future that looked brighter than her past. When they stepped outside, Ethan said quietly, "So, what do you think?" She looked at him, her eyes shining. "I think I want to try." His smile widened. "Then we'll make it happen." The following weeks were busy and filled with new challenges. Ethan handled the paperwork and permits, while Lila worked on recipes, designs, and the little details that would make the place feel like home. She didn't have much experience with business, but she had passion, and that seemed to be enough. Every night after closing the diner, she stayed up late mixing dough, testing flavors, and jotting notes. Even when she was exhausted, she felt alive. Ethan visited often, bringing coffee and encouragement. They spent hours talking and about dreams, fears, life, and everything in between. The bond between them grew quietly, like roots beneath the soil. One evening, while they were painting the bakery walls together, Lila paused and said softly, "I don't think I've ever been this happy." He looked at her, his eyes warm. "Then let's make sure it lasts." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that said more than words ever could. But just when everything seemed perfect, something unexpected happened. One morning, as Lila arrived at the diner, she noticed a few of her co-workers whispering. When she asked what was going on, Maya handed her a newspaper. On the front page was a photo of Ethan, standing in front of a large building, shaking hands with executives. The headline read, "Local business tycoon expands his real estate empire." Lila stared at the picture, her stomach twisting. The article talked about his company, his wealth, his influence, and all the things he had never mentioned. She felt confused. Why hadn't he told her who he really was? When he came to the diner that evening, she couldn't hide her feelings. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, calm but serious. "Would it have changed how you saw me?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe not. But I deserve to know the truth." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I just didn't want you to see me as one of those people who only throw money around. I wanted you to see me as I am, not as what I own." Lila's voice softened. "I don't care about what you own, Ethan. I care about honesty." He stepped closer. "And I've been honest about everything that matters. About believing in you, about wanting to see you happy. That's real." She looked into his eyes and saw no lies there, only sincerity. Her anger melted into something gentler, understanding, maybe even admiration. Still, the discovery left her shaken. That night she lay awake thinking about everything, his kindness, his offer, his secrets. She realized something important. She didn't want to depend on anyone, not even someone she trusted. She wanted to stand on her own. The next day she met him at the bakery and said softly, "I still want to do this, but I want to earn it myself. I want this to be something I build, not something I'm given." He smiled, proud, not hurt. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." From that day forward, they worked side by side, not as a rescuer and someone saved, but as partners, equals, each with their own scars, each learning how to heal. The bakery began to take shape, slow, steady, and full of heart. And though challenges still lay ahead, Lila felt ready for them, because for the first time in her life she wasn't running from her past. She was walking toward her future, and she knew, deep down, that everything and every pain, every scar, every moment of doubt, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The morning sun poured through the bakery's wide glass windows, painting everything in gold. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted into the street, soft and sweet. A small wooden sign hung outside the door that read, "Second Chance." Lila had painted it herself. It wasn't perfect, but that was the point, just like her. Opening day felt like a dream. The air buzzed with quiet excitement. Friends from the diner came to show support. Neighbors peeked through the window, and even a few strangers stopped by because of the smell. Lila moved behind the counter, her hands trembling. Not from fear this time, but from joy. Every loaf, every pastry, every cookie carried a piece of her heart. Maya walked in first, carrying flowers. "You did it," she said proudly. "You really did it," Lila smiled, her eyes glistening. "I still can't believe it's real." "Oh, it's real," Maya said, hugging her. "And it smells amazing." "I'm so proud of you." Ethan arrived a little later, holding a small box tied with a ribbon. He didn't say much at first, just stood quietly, watching her welcome her first customers. There was something peaceful in the way he looked at her, like he knew this moment meant more than words could ever explain. When she finally noticed him, her face lit up. "You came. Wouldn't miss it for the world," he said softly. He handed her the box. Inside was a simple necklace with a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. On the back it was engraved, "Keep shining." She looked at him, touched. "It's beautiful," he smiled. "So is what you've built." The day went by in a blur. Lila served pastries, brewed coffee, and greeted everyone with a genuine smile. Each customer who left carried a bit of warmth with them. Some recognized her from the diner and were surprised to see her here. Others had never met her before, and their kind words filled her heart. By evening, the bakery had sold out. Only a few crumbs were left in the trays. Lila stood in the quiet shop, exhausted but deeply happy. Ethan helped her wipe the counters while Maya locked the front door. When everything was finally clean, Lila turned off the lights and stood in the middle of the bakery looking around. "This feels like a dream," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "It's not a dream anymore. It's your life." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He looked at her softly. "You did all this. I just reminded you of who you already were." The next few weeks were busy. The bakery quickly became known in the neighborhood for its cozy atmosphere and delicious food. People came not just to eat, but to talk, to laugh, to feel at home. Lila treated everyone with kindness. The same kindness she once longed for when she was the girl being mocked at the diner. Sometimes when she looked in the mirror and saw her scar, she didn't flinch anymore. It was part of her, a reminder of how far she'd come. One afternoon, a little girl came into the bakery with her mother. The child looked shy and kept hiding behind her mom. When Lila bent down to greet her, the girl stared at her scar for a moment, then said softly, "You're pretty." Lila smiled, her heart swelling. "Thank you, sweetheart." The mother looked embarrassed, but Lila shook her head gently. "It's all right. Kids see things as they are." After they left, Lila stood behind the counter thinking about how much had changed. Once she used to hide her face from people. Now she greeted the world with it uncovered, unafraid. Ethan visited often, though he never interfered in how she ran things. He just came by to check on her, share coffee, and sometimes help wash dishes when it was busy. The connection between them had grown deeper, steady and quiet. It wasn't rushed. It simply existed, like a soft melody that played naturally in the background of her days. One evening, as they sat together in the empty bakery after closing, Lila looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, I used to think scars meant weakness," she said. "Now I see they mean survival." He nodded. "They tell stories, the kind that make people stronger." She smiled faintly. "Do you have any?" He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "I lost someone close to me a long time ago. After that, I buried myself in work. Money made it easy to forget, or at least to pretend. But I stopped living. Until I walked into that diner one day and saw someone who hadn't given up, even when life was cruel." Her eyes softened. "You saw yourself in me, didn't you?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just saw hope again." There was silence between them for a while, a comfortable silence filled with understanding. Weeks turned into months, and Second Chance grew busier. Local papers started writing about it, calling it a place built on kindness. The bakery became a small landmark in the community. Lila began hosting weekly coffee talks, where anyone could come and share stories or struggles over a cup of coffee. It was her way of giving back. People opened up about losing jobs, facing illness, chasing dreams, and somehow, everyone left feeling a little lighter. One morning, while she was arranging pastries, she noticed a familiar man walk in. It took her a moment to recognize him, one of the businessmen who had laughed at her years ago in the diner. His hair was grayer now, his expression humbler. He looked around the bakery, then at her, his face turning red with embarrassment. "Do you remember me?" he asked awkwardly. "I do," she said calmly. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "What I said back then was cruel. You didn't deserve that. I was a fool." Lila looked at him for a long moment, then smiled gently. "People say things they don't mean sometimes. What matters is what they learn after." He nodded, relief softening his face. "You've done well for yourself." I've had help, she said. But mostly I just stopped listening to the wrong voices. When he left, she stood by the window watching him walk away, feeling a strange peace. It wasn't revenge she felt, it was closure. The pain had turned into something softer, something healing. Later that week, the bakery held a small charity event. Ethan suggested it, and together they decided to donate part of the earnings to a program that helped people with visible scars and disfigurements regain confidence. Through therapy and job opportunities, the event was beautiful, full of laughter, music, and warmth. Lila spoke to the crowd about her journey, her voice steady and full of emotion. I used to hide, she said. I used to think my face made people uncomfortable. But I've learned something. People only see what you show them. When you lead with kindness, the rest fades away. Everyone here has something that scarred them, inside or out. But it's those scars that make us human. The room fell silent, then filled with applause. Ethan stood at the back, his eyes glistening with pride. After the event ended and the crowd left, Lila walked outside. The night was cool and the street was quiet. Ethan joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. You were incredible tonight, he said softly. She smiled. I was terrified. But it felt right, he nodded. You've become someone people look up to.